Gilg Jew, Gilg J as Gilg Nerach.
Sé Claare na Gael ten am a Claare shows, Bavaliam show shaltige. My name is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Did the ever hear tell of old Bobby Bob?
And this programme is called Claare na Gael, in which you'll hear part of it in the English language, as Angie Nishu Clash and Puirt Gilg, and in which you'll hear part of it in the Manx Gaelic, Chinian Amera, the mother tongue of Ellen Vanning, the Isle of Man. As Barracht and Jurish, we were dipping into a 1911 publication by W Y Evans Wentz last time, The Fairy Faith in the Celtic Countries, and we were looking at what Sophia Morrison had sent to him under her letter dated for September 1910. We'll finish her introduction and then we can move on to the evidence itself. Tan podden de churgeon smunnion nach she de chorischen Count Dracula, Jorish guller boerden lung de gimmerger kistjedoor as Transylvania, and tan Count na lai, as te foin te fau fosle en kistje, as straya chalirach, Jorish gara jeachjon, as sai kibin de chruj. Eisteddfod Gened Leithal has begun in the centre of Pontypridd this year, and playing in the T-Werin, the folk tent, the folk house, is the trio ALAW, now consisting of Dullan Fowler, Patrick Rhymes and Nia Lynn. Tashu Geis Jachrish, Radio Vanning, Station Nation, Viskulder Skeliamach by Dúlish, Ellen Vanning.
and fall on bith I folly.
The song Dai'r cantwr, and it was performed by ALAW, a trio from Wales. They're now consisting of Dylan Fowler, Patrick Rhymes and Neil Lynn, and they'll be playing in the T-Werin at the Eisteddfod Genedlaethol in Pontypridd. Sophia Morrison says that 9 out of 10 times strange experiences can be explained by modern science. She's writing this in 1910, of course, even though those experiencing these strange experiences don't have that understanding. However, she continues, but, she says, this is not enough. Even let it be granted that 9 out of every 10 cases of experiences with fairies can be analysed and explained away, there remains the 10th. In this 10th case, one is obliged to admit that there is something at work which we don't understand, some force in play which, as yet, we know not. In spite of ourselves, we feel, there's powers that's in. These powers, she says, and this is powers written with a capital P, these powers are not necessarily what the superstitious call supernatural. We realise now that there's nothing supernatural, that what used to be so-called is simply something that we don't understand at present. Our forefathers would have thought the telephone, the X-rays, and wireless telegraphy things supernatural. Tana'r and shoh Jane Skill as Liorla Jonathan Harker. Lyn y bu mon y doliad yn ein, leis fieric na leis na siolteren. Bwys the G, shoch and cheer as on G for the solach ALAW, coolina vegar be, as the paltje hurget ein. Genelli orin nach de junu shigan a vodden long chits jachs a Puirt, edder and lai grania as irina grania gin rau ve courage dun, as bimmet saucha. Ni in brew, poga urgid, recha hu shoh erliam. And sheola jeg jera fawr. Túrasl mína fósan rid chedin, tonnen lianten as ostjarai, dorachas as geachen fóráil. Scronnel de welsin ons tre mai, as tret as in clashen Jane Zarina Catherine, bimma jerlu. No de vele ori golshana daden ellen, shiga de bi túrasl enjach ein. And shachtul jeg jera fawr. Dat de goljerid son een goed smoe regit nish. Liam, de haltige Count Dracula shit back van Torresega. And now from Scotland we have some Puirt beul by Arthur Cormack.
Bí mi sé rusken lánin tú, bí mi sé rusken lánin, bí mi sé rusken lánin tú, is banje chruiek morek, bí banje chruiek morek hui, bí banje chruiek morek, bí banje chruiek morek hui, is mi sé rusken lánin, bí mi sé rusken lánin tú, bí mi sé rusken lánin, bí mi sé rusken lánin tú, is banje chruiek morek, bí banje chruiek morek hui, bí banje chruiek morek. Bí banje chruiek morek is mi sé rusken lánin. Cha chicken lánin, we got this and chicken curry, cha chicken lánin, we got this and chicken curry. So you make a cricket, John the Miracle, Say you me a cool of freckles down the made a coon. Listen, chicken could go, listen, chicken could, listen, chicken could go, so how I get a hoonish. Listen, chicken could go, listen, chicken could, listen, chicken could go, so how I get a hoonish. Got chicken law, hitch me, got you, listen, chicken could, chicken law, hitch me, got you, listen, chicken could. Say you me a cool of freckles down the made a coon. Say you me a cool of freckles down the made a coon. Listen, chicken could go, listen, chicken could, listen, chicken could go, so how I get a hoonish. Listen, chicken could go, listen, chicken could, listen, chicken could go, so how I get a hoonish. Kurnen går as a friction chille bake with doppelung the kurnen go as a friction chille bake up yarn the kurnen go as a friction chille bake with doppelung the kurnen go as a friction chille bake up yarn chille bake with doppelung chille bake up yarn chille bake with doppelung the kurnen go as a friction chille bake up yarn.
Arthur Cormack from Antelian Skianach Elian Shoh, the Isle of Skye. Dinch Godalming den Choloch Lingus, Drawe shielden for die drawe kistje va curger boord, kummel riddenach guides vai carade. As hure lie gordeel de bergje degge, fosley, ach, de bergen kormersen heen. Hugge shelluder, peber de inch den captain, de gorde dag sersnes ons ginu creer bi wege giri boorden long. As kid Jane sors chethen yes, den gintach egge ons Varna. Tashin vag nagen the gintach, the ginu moor jay immer gekindel Godalming rish, as tashin ulu shiga, grey be odyssey ginu, de choonelesh na yeri ein de be shen gint. Tashin rege hanna na de yinu, na visse chitlin fosler kistja. Me visse count on shen, ne van Helsing a Seward giara vai a chion chilirach, a sai kibbin through de chree. Ni Morris as Godalming as mish, liedel cum railer be, eer me vis femine ginu image in a weapon and be earlywine. It's more than possible, writes Sophia Morrison, that our descendants may make discoveries equally marvellous in the realms both of mind and matter, and that many things, which nowadays seem to the materialistically minded the creations of credulous fantasy, may in the future be understood and recognised as part of the one great scheme of things. Some persons are certainly more susceptible than others to these unknown forces. Most people know reliable instances of telepathy and presentiment amongst their acquaintances. It seems not at all contrary to reason that both matter and mind, in knowledge of which we haven't gone very far after all, may exist in forms as yet entirely unknown to us. After all, beings with bodies and personalities different from our own may well inhabit the unseen world around us. The fairy hound, white as driven snow, may show himself at times among his mundane companions. music from Cornwall, played by recent visitor to Llywelyn, Richard TRETHEWEY, and we'll hear more from Richard later on.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Siodiw stasiwn y nasiwn radio fanning, a si Claare na Gael wisgol yr sgeliena gan tre ton. Mish Robert gyda'n corfol, Robert y corslach.
Have you heard tell of our Bobby Bob?
Ten Claare sior y chlash yn rhys siach yn lwg gigol yr sgelia mach yn chir, fod isiw fedd yn y craman agert yn y deg y radio fanning, as da enfyn y Claare yn rygedyn o'n sien. The podcast Jane Claare yes, vis regetten nasty in the radio vanning, the trud keredr and podcast elia, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Audible, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, na Alexa. Sophia Morrison is suggesting keeping an open mind, that the fairy hound may have an existence, and she concludes with two more possibilities. For Nardary, she writes, may do the farm work for those whom he favours. The little people may sing and dance o' nights in Colby Glen. Let's not say it's impossible. And then she puts that she was writing this from Peel, Isle of Man, September 1910. And after Sophia Morrison's introduction, we have evidence taken down by W Y Evans Wentz, Walter Yealing Evans Wentz. He was an American scholar with a BA and MA from Stanford University, and then he was undertaking this work for his PhD thesis at Jesus College, Oxford. His book, The Fairy Faith in the Celtic Countries, is basically his PhD thesis. He visited the island in 1909, and Sophia Morrison, I think, took him to meet people. It seems almost certain that she would have done. The first part is entitled On the Slopes of South Beul. I was introduced to the ways and nature of Manx fairies, he writes, in what is probably the most fairy-haunted part of the isle. Tan olw Graham a vision able the chorish corp a count masaw, the ginne de leer lug shen tujim mar John. Ons lid a chush ge berg fenisher bean a naain, de berg ouders jay dunveris chit de veon. Ach, eer manach rawe, yenach shen shadow na tujim through de nimiach ein, as fuddy laenjach de be an eer kunter scroot shaw, ginusus fenish de hit eder custien, as Ted. Mahan heen, yenen goil a care sledden buisem na vis chit. Te foin gin Gael mui imiach bi ons culina Careline. Tashin a rege les chartans de erig, cholies tan zarina Catherine Cronich, de be fis courage dun, joris tjachte lie. En Geroleus fi Jerafauer. Sledden sjacht en dorchten. Chelgrammen dachleis on Godalming, ach weg ach an onskeel, gin toerastel fors. Ta fregert mina for hypnosis, maar as faster beg, gin cochlei, tonnen lianten, usjerai, as kroon, gistery. Now we heard Scottish band HAAS visitors to Llywelyn this year, playing a piece inspired by the Manx tale of TEGI, and this is a song on that same theme by Vooar. Vooar, and a song about the alluring power of Tiggy Tiggy, which they sang at Druniach the other week there. Chelgram, Gerafawr and Cherolaes Feed. Rufus Smith, Colwch Lloyd Lunning, Gussan Charn Godalming, Trud HBM, Lias Consul Varna. Tourastel, Jesarina Catherine, Mora Jew, Vina Dardanellen. Gilen and Erly Seward and Hwegolaes Feed Gerafawr. Huish fodiach tem son my phonograph. Sborach thou screw Gilen lesh pen, ach de Van Helsing grey de velle arm. Fashin you greasit, jerskin taus jay tre hoer Godalming a Chelgram egge by een Colwch Lloyd. Genel visser BM sen te Dania gennachten ons ka tret an aim de gager a glaasjen. She benaisje hake van onveeg ze vodden een ren kourige maag mannen bij de enjachten. Nee eigen e kwege in rennie, no de rensjen goil kerel lie, nai ligge visser BJ chitji. Ons ne sjaan leien vegi tam I shigge chor Gael day, dinne wiste nachwegsje na chor bervollige, Now, probably the most fairy-haunted part of the Isle, says W Y Evans Wentz, the southern slopes of South Beul, the mountain on whose summit Manannan is said to have had his stronghold, and whence he worked his magic, hiding the kingdom in dense fog whenever he beheld in the distance the coming of an enemy's ship or fleet. And from a representative of the older generation, Mrs. Samuel Leese, who lives at Ballamarda, a pleasant village under the shadow of South Beul, I heard the first story. And there's a name, or perhaps better a description of the story first, Baby and Table Moved by Fairies. And so this is Mrs. Samuel Leese's evidence given to W Y Evans Wentz. I've been told of the fairies, taking babies, though I can't be sure it's true. But this did happen to my own mother in this parish of Kirkpatrick about 80 years since. And as Evans Wentz was collecting this in 1909, this is taking us back to about 1830. We're not going back quite as far, but certainly going back a fair way. This is a 1951 recording of Breton singer ARMAND HAAS, accompanied on piano by Suzanne de Villiers, and it's about a Sunday morning hunting trip for hare and woodcock.
Disul vintin abred lamsor en ren la la vinta en ren la lidena. Chassi aldri avrutiu Mezis ken azahuatiu Moslas kechad echebelego ren la la rintor ren la lidena Kavet mechana mezektiu Monico vuela directiu Peraguela vadus monico ren la rinto ren alidena Naunemus avo pipsnotiu Dagola in orama Mamme cregi e zorni gwen o ren o la rintra o ren alidena Kaset me da chwat ganem tiu Ni kana the chana wen tiu Perage kana vasus manigo ren o la rintra o ren alidena Pajam glone bachalonik tiu Amiga nu verlaniosik tiu
A Breton song about an incident one Sunday morning, Disul vintin, when a hunter meets a young woman. Armand HAAS was accompanied by Suzanne de Villiers. And Mrs. Samuel Leese's mother, she says, was in bed with her baby, but wide awake when she felt the baby pulled off her arm and heard the rush of them. Then she mentioned the Almighty's name, and as they were hurrying away, a little table alongside the bed went round about the floor 20 times. Nobody was in the room with my mother, and she's always allowed it was the little fellas. There's another heading now. Manx Tales in a Snowbound Farmhouse. When our interesting conversation was over, Mrs. Leese directed me to her son's farmhouse, where her husband, Mr. Samuel Leese, then happened to be. And going there through the snowdrifts, I found him with his son and the family within. The day was just the right sort to stir Manx memories, and it wasn't long before the best of stories about the little people were being told in the most natural way, and to the great delight of the children. The grandfather, who is 86 years of age, sat by the open fire, smoking. Ach, synach shoh ti chlaare de moor ons na 3 seachtain tengol sha. Tan liastid ges onji. As ger de vel e jean de ve ledges ons slent by, as ta Puirt jean de ek chit door I rish, Genel shen de loer de Van Helsing as doos. Ta shin lort mechau niet de mennik, a genel shin een rij vogel rish na Firelia. Jinne ge brisje krie haker bach, zo'n shigeris een jaar eignjege, de berg visegge, de rauw eer oude zijn erg hoes. De Van Helsing scrutige, maar te ginstouw, na fieglenek fiegerelach, gouds die ons steed voor hypnosis. Affair te greig houds na wel het gold toiach der birige, na wel gauw bio je chlaare onji. Maar wisse chlaare shortjit, weg feim ginuridrach. De visek na nistjin, na weg feim ginu, gerne wel shin chit der smunjen ein wisje gelia. Het ginnach en derre jein en jeelje veel jeel onze gorm, aglach mor de berge de smunjen And that's a harp player from County Mayo, Alana Thornborough, with one of her own compositions called Branjo.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Stasiwn yn asiwn tyn ei sio siandag reis on sigaris radio vanim. A siod yw cartnish, Claare na Gael, mer yn pin, Robert Gytyn Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Have I heard tell of old Bobby Bob?
She fogel fi via bastel viskurdige. ta euthanasia. Tammy buisel de quayer beer en crué. Genaleach shohle mus care oers feed vina dad en Ellen gesaw eg a viewed dan zari na Catherine jit by lunning. Skasolach de ginny rash en tre enjach savora. Ach, no noch ne possible G carsnus jack on rash en da she nulliwer she gold the light de morge. Nimme jiri eg nen erglag de beurlu. An chwegolais fi jera fawr munlai. Gin naich fos mach yon rashen along. Va toeristel benaas je hake voor hypnosis mor Jew an unrid mother kajen, maar so fuddy de jig naich dun shalid erbij. Da shingen de dene oljun in ons chassit de griezige, limme je hake, ta kjun. Tan a lauwe nege gevoer as rio. As oer de henne, huur mea, sluw, voor jen skin voer gorge, te de kinjak gimmerke merish. Now this 86-year-old grandfather must be Mr. Samuel Leese, I think, and, says W Y Evans Wentz, prepared the way for the stories, 3 of which we record, by telling about a ghost seen by himself and his father, and by the announcement that the fairies are thought to be spirits. And now there's another name or description here, which is under fairy control. And we don't hear from Mr. Samuel Leese anyway. About 50 years ago, said Mr. T. Leese, the son, Paul Taggart, my wife's uncle, a tailor by trade, had for an apprentice Humphrey Kegan, a young man 18 or 19 years of age. And it often happened that while the two of them would be returning home at nightfall, the apprentice would suddenly disappear from the side of the tailor, and even in the midst of a conversation, as soon as they crossed the burn in the field down there, indicating a militial, would suddenly disappear from the side of the tailor, even in the midst of a conversation, as soon as they crossed the burn in the field down there, indicating an adjoining field. And Taggart couldn't see nor hear Humphrey go. The next morning Humphrey would come back, but so worn out that he couldn't work. Now this is the Welsh trio of siblings Ellan, Marged and Gwilym Rhys, telling us to let go. Gollwng gafael. The trio Pli, and Pli means feathers, and Pli are made up of the Rhys siblings, Ellen, Margaret and Gwilym, and they're from the village of Bethel in Gwynedd. It's about 4 miles up the road northeast of Caernarfon. And some miles from Caernarfon, though, the Eisteddfod is being held in the south this year. It's down in Pontypridd. In fact, unusually, it was in the middle of Cardiff the other year, but this time, again, it's in the middle of a town. It's right in the middle of Pontypridd. Humphrey always declared that lil men had come to him in crowds and used him as a horse, and that with them he travelled all night across fields and over hedges. The wife of the narrator substantiated this strange psychological story by adding, "This is true, because I know my Uncle Paul too well to doubt what he says." And then she related the 2 following stories. And the name or description of this, the first story, is Heifer Killed by Fairy Woman's Touch. And Jane was coming down the road on the other side of South Beul when she saw a strange man, who Mr. Teeley suggested was a witch, notes Mr. Evans Wentz. He saw a strange woman appear in the middle of the gorse and walk right over the gorse and heather in a place where no person could walk. Then she observed the woman go up to a heifer and put a hand on it, and within a few days that heifer was dead. And the second story told by the wife of Mr. Teeley's is The Fairy Dog. We won't have time for that just now, I'm afraid. We'll come back to that. Bí drach airtas ag account ma vis fór a chucrí shen riú benton rish a scornach, sait ag a lau grámach a fúras rio. We van Helsingers mish beggan burrich mechion benaisha hakerju. Mush mun lai henki de vei fo sorsenjach del jastid nach mailish fer erbijin. Vi njau eishach caravori, mar so ag a toiacht was een man retreva fisain de rawi na cadla. Ach tre rinne dunje sheshe chit der de njau chushach, de rawi cadla getrom na doddy gedoeste hi, haishin gus a chemerech de yin en son heen. Vi tar nennel ons ach toegesag, as vi gin geslentoil a she-oil, de renshin cordeel de rauwen Sabine na share son na vegelia. A benboch, de chwieshek de jeroed nach nirresei de wel cadla, maar we se corlesh njau chunjen gi, ginu fawes gi. Na san mi, van Barline prowl de ve kaart. Now this is Scottish singer Fiona Mackenzie with the band Annam, with a song about Little Murdoch, Little Murdo, the head, the leader, the best for quarrelling.
Ho, Harry, ho, kio, ho, for the hiffic a keen, honey, shanyan of two, golly, ho, Harry, kio, ho, yan of two, golly, hatta la pisan, yadi, ho, Harry, kio, ho, hatta la pisan, yadi, young ball, patigari, ho, Harry, kio, ho, on a ball, patigari, good. Narse vagur kujoch ho heri o kio ho Guram narse vagur kujoch nyanak lam shit kapujur ho heri o kio ho nyanak lam shit kapujur topper fiane vine vabo ho heri o kio ho topper fiane vine vabo trur kvamne viga mug ho heri o kio ho Riga meg skumbaling bulleripoli ho heri o kio ho skumbaling bulleripoli kaptresen mina kri ho heri o kio ho kaptresen mina kri samle derna tangun kri ho heri o kio ho samle derna tangun kri lesje jerik na pirde ho heri o Jerig na firre, jerig meire vala kjelle ho heri o kio ho jerig meire vala kjelle jerig shitla dir matnjen ho heri o kio ho
Wyrchi vig a chin a chonish, Fiona Mackenzie and Annam, with, in Manx terms, I suppose, a song about little Curfew, perhaps. Traer any dusta lug savin, Uracha, rish cus de uren, vi gian de ve, na skinnel as na share na vi, rish lane. Egan laig renia huggy a turasl cajin for hypnosis. Claare be as Tei'r a Vooar gu, ten Count Sairicha den John Jorneega. Den Vesega tami tres Gael. Now we've heard a story told by the older Mrs. Leese, and her husband Samuel had told one, which it got a brief mention, but we didn't hear what it was, before their son Mr. T. Leese told a story, and that was followed by the first of two stories by his wife. And as I say, we'll come back to the second of those stories about the fairy dog next time. Ach cartalot and Traer Jitdow the Giaull. And waiting to move in now is Chris Pearson to present 2 hours of the best chill-out music from 7 to 9, and then at 9 o'clock Judith Leigh will be here to present her programme Sundown. We close Claare Gael with more music from Cornish singer, fiddle and cittern player Richard TRETHEWEY, finishing with the title track of his latest album, Two Halves. Ach Shananish, and so until the next time, this is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Our Bobby Bob.
Wishing you a very good night. Eve, I'm a Crieri, was Orserlier, as Mayirian shared you will you.